and welcome.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Watch Insider. My name is Brian, and thank you for logging on. I'm joined tonight by Tim Masso.
Pleasure to be here.
Who you guys all know, of course. And tonight we have an exciting show. So tonight is actually going to be a mono-branded show. I brought on a bunch of cool Patek Philippe watches from the vault that I think you guys will all be excited to see. And as always, if you have any questions, this is the time to ask. Tim and I will be answering questions all throughout the show.
Friends, joining us, I can see Big Mike, Xavier N., Matt Foster, Bill H. joining from San Francisco. Hang in there, California guys. Russell 996, greetings from New York. Welcome, Cecil, Eric Cecil. And I can see we've got Russell 996 commenting, just taking off, Ulysse Norden, Tellurium. Very cool. If you're floating the Tellurium, you are a baller and a connoisseur. And I can also see Eddie Landsberg, a longtime friend and proprietor of our unofficial Facebook fan page, Michael Girard, Jason Reeves, Ryan H. Hale Bop, a customer of ours. Welcome, guys. Let's get started with something simple but absolutely delightful. Possibly the modern automatic Patek Philippe dress watch, the 5296G. Bro, why don't you tell us a little bit about this one?
So the Patek 5296G here is I believe it's an automatic movement here in white gold with a blue track dial on a blue crocodile strap. So this for a while was, and I believe it still is, the largest three-hand watch with a date piece that Patek Philippe has in their arsenal.
Yeah, I think if you discount something like the 5524G, which is a cheater because it has a pointer date, this is a very large three-hand date timepiece from Patek Philippe that is even more dramatic because its aspect ratio, its flatness and its broadness give it drama on the wrist. I'll even add that this piece is a wonderful discontinued combination of caliber and dial because old school on the case back here, you could see that this is the old Geneva hallmark, and this model debuted in 2007. The Geneva hallmark was phased out in mid-2009, so this is a narrow window of classical goodness, beautiful on both sides. The sector dial with a rich history in Patek Philippe timepieces of the mid-century. It's highly technical without being complicated, so it gives you the benefit of something that was designed for reading with precision, but at the same time it doesn't mar the dial with subdials, sub-registers, secondary displays. It manages to make something very simple, very complicated without encumbering it.
I don't believe it's been discontinued though.
Well, this one, I'm just saying, has been discontinued because it's the old Geneva hallmark movement.
Yes.
Let me throw it on the wrist. You guys know my Zinn Easy M11. Semi-celebrity tank tough beater watch. I'll show you that one real quick. And you can see how elegant the Patek is next to its big brother from Germany. So let's throw this one on the wrist and get a sense of it. It is a very broad and flat watch, and nothing accentuates that more than the bezel. Bezel design is an unsung core trait of any watch, and the flatter the bezel, the broader the watch often appears. A flat bezel can take a relatively pedestrian design and give it an element of drama and span and scope, and that's what you see right here. Not since the 5107 have we seen a Patek with such a broad and flat bezel. It's almost as flat as the Sapphire itself. That's a handsome watch, and again, you don't have to spend grand complication money or Nautilus money to get an iconic Patek Philippe, and this is proof of that.
Exactly. So at 38 millimeters, it is one of their largest, larger dress watches. And what I like so much about this watch is that it's really like a casual dress watch. For them, before they came out with, I don't necessarily want to call the 5524 as, a casual dress watch. It probably leans more towards the sporty side. But it's the watch that you would want if you wanted a dress watch from them. That's something that you could also dress down. And that's where it differentiated itself a lot, from a lot of their hobnail pieces. And was, obviously, closer in similarity to the 5127 and then the 5227. But, once they moved the 5227, which is also a three-hand to a date, to the officer-style case, this came in at, a much better price point.
The other problem is with the 5227, I don't care how well it's integrated, but the Hunter caseback is always going to add thickness.
Yeah.
This is absolutely, this is as flat and broad as a plank, and it has a slim profile to it that doesn't require a knife-edged case to have effect. And I think just for dramatic contrast, we have two watches that are fairly simple timepieces on the table tonight. We have the 5100 in my right hand, and then adjacent the 5296G, both white gold, but you can see
drawing on different parts of Patek Philippe history. Here you have watches like the mid-century pre-Calatravas, and then with the 5100, it's based very specifically on the reference 2554 Manta of the 1950s. That was a shaped watch, shaped caliber with dramatic batwing profile, and this was the millennial reference 5100, 10-day power reserve, manual wind, and the watch you see right here was part of a series in white gold. There were 3,000 made in total. I believe 450 were made in white gold, and that's the watch you see right here. A dramatic piece with a blue sunburst. It might be the most desirable of the group. It's also a surprisingly compact watch. It looks huge, but on the wrist, it's a surprisingly compact thing lug to lug. I believe only about 46 millimeters, but it's a tribute to the 1950s 2554, but it has so much more refinement about dial, case, and when you flip it over, the movement, which is shaped and structured with a handsome traditional finger-style Geneva bridge sequence. So it's not just a shaped and sized movement, it is also a highly stylized movement, and a 10-day power reserve COSC certified Swiss chronometer. This is one of those rare high horology watches that came with a COSC cert. That's one of the things that makes it super special.
And so, interesting fact, Patek several years back came out with a reference 5200, which was an 8-day power reserve, also featuring a day and date complication. And it's based off this caliber.
It is.
But the reason why that watch is 8-day instead of 10-day is because of the extra power that's drawn from the movement in order to operate the day and date feature.
And I think the purest choice is the 5100. It was a great moment for Patek. Not too many watches designed in the late 1990s and brought to market in the year 2000 still look sharp and contemporary today. 90s watch design has, for the most part, not aged well. You look at this, and this is a watch that would have been probably planned from about 96, 97 to bring it to market in 2000. This design, the dial, the case, the movement, it hasn't aged a day.
It's beautiful. And what I like so much about it as well is just, it's not just a typical rectangular watch. Like there's definitely an artistic flair to it, which differentiate itself when it's on the wrist.
Certainly, if you were going to buy a Patek Philippe and you didn't want to go with something run-of-the-mill, but you wanted iconic design, it's a little bit back catalog, but folks who really appreciate the brand know those older references. They'll remember the original Manta, and they'll remember this. This is a way to go if you want to go Patek without a Calatrava, without a Nautilus, without an Aquanaut, without too much complication. Let's jump into something that does have too much complication.
All right, let's do it. So here we have one of my favorite references, and definitely a grail of mine, is the 5970G. So this is the Patek 5970 in white gold. It's their perpetual calendar chronograph. This watch was discontinued in favor of the most recent reference, and also with an in-house Patek movement, their first in-house perpetual chrono, the 5270. So this is a Lemania based, it's the last of the Lemania based perpetual chronos, and to me it's one of the greatest references of all time. This particular example happens to be completely unpolished, and Tim can tell you sort of how you can tell that. The lines are extraordinarily sharp, and to me the watch is just absolutely perfect.
Yes, if you'll hand me the polishing cloth so this one can be worthy of its spotlight solo. There are certain features of the case, and we'll talk about the movement in a moment, but I want to talk about the features of the case that always distinguish these in original condition from the overpolished examples. And I'm sad to say that a watch released in 2004 has already, in many instances, been overpolished. This one is not. First, the transitional surface from the hood of the lug down to the flanks. You can see that this watch has been worn, and it has evidence of having been on the wrist, but the creases are incredibly sharp, and all the volumes of metal are present. You'll note side to side, the lugs are completely symmetrical, and that's true on both sides. There's the same amount of metal on both sides. That's another hallmark of an unpolished watch. The cleft between the case and the lug is a distinguishing feature of these, as these were welded lugs, so they're welded on, and evidence of the solder joint was then removed by hand. And you can see that there is still a sharp seam. That's a place where even wear on the wrist tends not to affect the
watch, you can see that sharp seam is still present. You can see it's present at the junction of each one of the lugs. These are the kind of things we look for when we evaluate these watches. I would rather have a watch that's original with some evidence of having been worn and scratches than to find a watch that weighs 5 or 6 grams less because it's been so over polished it looks like a pebble in a stream. You'll also note that the timepiece features the original sharp break between its concave bezel and the lip of the bezel. That short vertical segment is another canary in the coal mine for an over polished watch, and this has none of those signs. Let me quickly flip it over because we teased you with a Lamagna based caliber and now you're going to see it. This in Patek speak is the CH2770. So a timepiece with a history dating back to the 1940s, and it counts within its family tree the Omega 321 column wheel chrono that went to the moon. And this is basically an Abausch Lamagna would call the 2310. You know it's a big old slow beat chrono because the balance is almost 1/3 the diameter of the entire movement, and it's beaten away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. You can also see the lateral clutch. This is why you want an old-fashioned lateral clutch. By the way, this one fully jeweled, a deluxe feature for a lateral clutch. But when it's brought into contact, it starts driving that center wheel. You see the capped column wheel and the levers and horns that interact with it. Now you draw that driving wheel away and you reset, and all the recentering hammers are going to fall on the heart cams at the center. Just like that. It keeps no secrets. It's not latest tech, but you know what it is? It's timeless, it's emotional, it's visceral, and it's all visible. Give me that over an automatic vertical clutch chrono any day of the week. And it's 40 millimeters.
Now, the current version of the watch, the 5270, with Patek's in-house perpetual counter chrono, definitely is a better movement, though.
Well, what they did was they kept the basic architecture. It's a manual wind, it's a lateral clutch. Everything you can see in this, you can see in that. What that has on this one is it has a 6-position adjustment versus 5. It has a 65-hour power reserve versus 48, and it has a modern beat rate, so 28.8 versus 18,000. Of course, the new movement is more accurate, more durable, longer legged. It's a modern caliber. If you want something that's almost like a vintage watch made in recent years, one of these 2004 to 2010 models is perfect because it is quite literally like buying a vintage car made in the modern era. It's an old architecture and beautiful for it. There's a place in the world for both.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
In any collection.
Yeah.
I would own both.
All right, so we're waiting for questions to come from you guys. So keep firing them off, and we'll keep talking about watches. Here we have, I'm sure you guys will all recognize it. This is a Patek Philippe 5980 two-tone. So that is an AR, meaning it is steel and rose gold. So this is similar to the all rose gold. The only two 5980s still in production. They've obviously discontinued the all steel version. Here we have the steel and rose gold with a bright blue dial, rose indices. You've got the rose bezel, and then you've got the the steel bracelet with the rose center links. And to me, this watch, I think, didn't get nearly enough credit when it was being, I would say, when it was being produced in conjunction with all three. Consumers tended to gravitate more towards either the all rose or the steel. But, I think it's absolutely beautiful. And I think that it's definitely, it's got a pop on the wrist while still less, call it less blingy than the all rose version.
A couple things I like about this watch. First, it was a low-lying debut in 2013. As you said, the watch didn't get enough press when it was released. 2013 was a big year just across the board for a lot of brands, and this one, as a variation of an existing model, sort of got lost in the shuffle. But it has a few qualities that really stand out. First, less is more. Less gold is more dramatic. A full gold 5980 is overpowering, but the red highlights here, especially next to that iridescent blue metallic dial, simply explode. I'll also say this. Like Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe has several different dials for its core sports watches. They have darker and lighter blues, and this is one of the lighter ones. AP has a lighter blue for its yellow gold Royal Oaks, and Patek had a lighter blue for its rose gold and steel Nautilus chrono. And it is dramatic seeing that explosive metallic blue right next to the red gold. The way the red gold frames the blue is simply
its virtuosity in design, and that's maybe not something the Nautilus chrono gets enough credit for. Just how well integrated all the elements are. You'd think it's a huge watch. You'd think it's the size of an offshore, but then you look at it on the wrist, and it's relatively slim. It's only 12.5 millimeters thick. That's about a Daytona. It wears on my tiny wrist, and yet it gives you everything you want. Automatic winding, flyback chrono, 120 meters water resistant. They even prevent it from looking like an elephant-eared adaptation of a chrono to a standard watch by integrating those chrono pushers into the frame on the crown side of the timepiece. It's a remarkably good adaptation of a watch designed decades ago, never intended to be a chronograph, and they did it with color and panache.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely, I think it's an absolutely awesome combination. And, you know, as we both said, I don't think it got enough, you know, it's still being produced, but it, you know, obviously all Nautiluses now are extremely difficult to come by, but this one more than most. I mean, we've probably seen less of this watch than almost any other Nautilus currently in production.
That's a fact. I think I've had one previous opportunity to film this watch, and that watch and this watch, that's the extent of what I've seen in 4.5 years doing this. Now you can see two different takes on a Patek Philippe, mostly steel flyback chrono. We just showed you the 5980 1AR, so I'm going to show you the 5960 1A, and I believe this is the 010. This is a model that bowed in early 2017 and was discontinued in late 2017, which is to say it's pretty much a perfect storm. A steel Patek Philippe sports watch produced for about 9 months. Add to the fact that there was also a white dial variant, and you realize just how subdivided Patek steel sports watch production is. So 20% of Patek production is steel. Most of that is the ladies 24. Most of the remainder is Aquanauts and Nautilus. Of these, the 5960 1A, most were made from 2014 to 2018 as the white dial, and a small subset of production for 1 year was this black dial. That's a rare watch and a fun one to own.
Yeah, I mean, I love this watch, and I think that, you know, the 5960 in general was definitely one of those references that Patek collectors either really, really loved or really, really disliked. And I think a lot of that came down partially to the bracelet. I think that some collectors or consumers were put off by the high polish. And perhaps just the sporty nature of that, you know, the original iteration being the white, sort of that stark white dial, the sporty nature of the watch, in a watch that sort of was in between being a sport or dress watch. And, you know, I think that for those that have owned the watch, the feedback that I got is that they absolutely loved it. And to me, like, you know, I'm a sucker for black dials. I absolutely love this watch. The high polish on it really doesn't bother me at all. And, you know, I think it's a, you know, extremely cool piece. I like that Patek went as far as having the date windows, you know, making sure that they were black. I think that they ended this call it the steel run of these on a high note. Now, the model itself is not completely discontinued. They're still doing the 5960G with a blue dial,
yes,
on the brown calfskin. So they're still producing 5960s, but, you know, the steel is completely done. And I really do think that they went out on a high note, and that anybody who was lucky enough to pick up one of these watches will, down the road, definitely be happy that they did.
Yeah, this is a great candidate for a one watch. In stainless steel, it's rugged and everyday durable. Automatic winding, annual calendar, flyback chronograph, fully loomed dial. Brian mentioned that the 5960G is still in production, and I think it's a testament to the success of this dial design that so many elements of the steel dial, because this was a new dial when it bowed in 2014 on the white dial variant. The hands were different, the indices were different, the counter was different, the apertures were different. With the new 5960G that's still in production, for the first time, the sports dial 5960 features were adapted to the precious metal versions. And again, this is the watch family that introduced that version with the bolder hands, the bolder indices, in some respects a simplified counter at 6 o'clock. So you've also got a power reserve, you've got automatic winding, column wheel, vertical clutch, chrono. The only strike against this watch, in my opinion, is that it doesn't quite finish the job as a sports watch. 30 meters water resistant is basically splash only. I really think that was done to protect the Nautilus, because otherwise, this watch with the annual calendar and the flyback chrono, automatic winding, full steel, and a versatile size, this would have monopolized sports watch sales at Patek. There's really no weakness if this thing were highly water resistant.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I don't think that this watch is trying to be a sports watch. I think that it was always intended to be something of a cross between the two, and that if the Nautilus or the Aquanaut was too sportier than the collector wanted, this was a nice balance between that and something that was a little bit more dressy. But again, Matt Forster sort of asked about production numbers, and while obviously I don't know, and they don't disclose it. If you look at Patek has around 90 to 100 doors in the United States, they produce this watch for roughly 6 to 9 months, and you assume that every door got at least one. Some may have gotten none, some may have gotten two. So you have to assume that at least call it 100 to 150 came into the United States. That's really not very many of a Patek reference to be produced for a country that encompasses maybe at least 30% of their production.
I'm going to say this. Figure if 20% of Patek production really is steel, I think it's a little bit more. I think they're not letting on completely. But let's say they make 50,000 watches a year. 20% is going to be steel. Most of that's going to be the ladies 24. So we have about 10,000 watches made in steel, and most of them are going to be the ladies 24, 49, 10. So let's say that's about 5,000 watches. Now, if the remaining 5,000, most of that is going to be the Aquanaut and the Nautilus. Mm-hmm. Let's say that's 3,000 to 4,000 watches a year. Mm-hmm. So you're left with somewhere between 2,000 and 1,000 of these being made in both varieties, the white and the black dial. And keep in mind that this wasn't shipping before Basel 2017, so that's about a quarter of the year right there already passed. Yeah. So most of the 5960 production for that year would have been the white dial. You're looking at a few hundred watches.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is probably, obviously, definitely under 1,000 produced. So if the U.S. got anywhere from 100 to 150, and you have to think, all of the other markets, let's call it 500 to 750 probably is where it lands.
Yeah. So in other words, there are a hell of a lot more 3700s in steel kicking around than that baby right there.
Yeah.
I got a watch in a sleeve. I'm sorry, guys. I apologize for this, but
you can't take it out.
Yeah. Whoever buys this, you get the medieval
get to breathe in that Geneva air.
Yeah, you get the equivalent of the medieval first night rites with this one. So this is a sealed watch and a great one. Celestial complication. I'm not going to wax too extensive on this because you can't quite see it, but what you're looking at is a sidereal time and lunation display. So the location of the stars of the Milky Way and the moon in the sky over the northern hemisphere, and it also gives you sidereal time, whereby you'll be watching the passage of one star twice against a given meridian, and that will be a sidereal day. So you have that star chart and multiple overlapping layers of sapphire that create an incredible depth and luster, and just looking at it through the plastic, it looks special because it is a very important timepiece built from about 2002 to about 2012. This is the 5102. It was replaced by a somewhat larger watch that has a date. Frankly, I prefer the unadorned simplicity of the original, and like most higher-end Patek automatics, it's powered by a variant of the 240 micro rotor. A very special watch, and again, thanks to my enormous library of previous watch reviews, you can see this one out of the sleeve. A previous example we had that I set and operated for your viewing pleasure in high def on Watchbox Reviews. Let's finish this baby. What do we got on the table tonight? Let's talk about our watches. Let's end with our watches, yours and mine.
Okay, so this is a watch that I honestly haven't worn in a while, but I've definitely brought it on the show before. To be perfectly honest, I literally didn't even set the watch today just because I didn't have a pusher on hand.
No, it's okay. It's better not to try to set your perpetual calendar with a pen, guys.
Exactly, or a paper clip, which I even thought about. So I'll hold it up here. So here we have, this is a Roger Dubuis Sympathy 37 millimeter. It's one of the original Sympathies that came out in the late 90s to early 2000s when Roger Dubuis was still with the company. This watch came obviously with the, it came with the full box set, all like the handwritten notes and everything like that. And one of the coolest features of this watch to me, which is why it really spoke to me, is I absolutely love the case. It's something that I've never seen any other brand do, and I just think that it's got this really funky, unique appeal. And the crystal itself is cut to be the shape of the case. And this was something that was unique to these early Sympathies in that it's such an expensive process that over time they opted to keep the Sympathy case but actually cut around crystal, which follows sort of the outline, that roundness of the dial, and then fill in the, that gap area there, and in order to cut down the cost of the watch. And so this to me is like, I love that. I love that, no expense was spared in producing this watch, and it was really like a creation of love, and that's one of the things that attracted me to it most.
Yeah, Sympathy 37, the early shaped bezel, dial, sapphire, all corresponding lacquer dial, retrograding perpetual calendar. It's driven by a Roger Dubuis caliber 57, which is a Longines L990 finished to Geneva hallmark standards, and it's two things. It's Geneva hallmark, and you'll note Bulletin d'Observatoire at the top. That is a French Besançon Observatory chronometer certificate. So this is a double standard watch, and the Observatory chronometer certificate is something Roger Dubuis later discontinued, so this watch is an early example on multiple counts. The Longines-based caliber, the French chronometer certificate, and the original shaped sapphire design, and it's a wonderfully compact watch. Brian's got it on a nice suede strap, but you can see it's a good match for the red gold case. Actually tones it down a bit. This is a wonderful size, plenty expressive. It doesn't have to be big to make a statement. The strength of the case, the strength of the lugs, and the sharp points, almost like a liquid metal being drawn outward while still molten. It's an extraordinary timepiece, and it's very, very similar to the example that Dubuis himself wore in his last years. It was almost identical to the style.
Yeah, and what's funny about this watch is, because I'm getting some feedback from the chat, is that it's really something you either love or hate.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love it. Some folks just look at it and I think that they just don't, they just don't see it the way that I do. One of the quirky features of it that was pointed out to me that I honestly had never noticed before is that the dial really just looks like a baseball. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And every time I now look at it, I see a baseball on the dial, and it honestly kills me a little bit inside each time I see it. But again, what can you do?
I'm okay, I like baseball, and I like Dubuis, so that works for me on both levels. This is a polarizing look, and Dubuis would become more polarizing. Early on, the designs were a collaboration between Dubuis and his business partner, Carlos Diaz. This particular design was actually created by a Valet de Joux case maker who suggested it to the then Sogem company that became Dubuis later on. But because the watches eventually became so polarizing, they started printing just for friends on the back. If you've ever seen that on a Dubuis watch, it's an inside joke, essentially admitting, you know what, these watches aren't for everyone, and some people are going to hate them outright. So the company's okay with offending some folks and perhaps bewitching others. I think that's the ethic of the company. It continues today. It's a very polarizing brand to this day.
I cheaped out on the buckle, though. I have a steel buckle.
Well, it's okay. That's the part that always gets ground against your desk. I'm okay with that. Speaking of which,
buckles are expensive.
A buckle that is not expensive from my Zinn EZM11. This was a 2017 20th anniversary redesign of the 1997 original. The original was made for German paramilitary customs service branches. The ZUZ, it's basically a militarized branch of German Central Customs for dealing with smugglers, human traffickers, drug traffickers. The original was a 40 in titanium. This is a 43 in tegamented steel. It's basically impossible to scratch, and I would know. I've banged it into seatbelt buckles, door frames, hard things that normally don't yield, and it has yet to acquire a single untoward mark. It has a bidirectional rotating bezel. It has a Zinn modification of a Valjoux 7750 with a lefty actuation configuration, so you can move your wrist around without it digging your wrist while you're holding a gun. I'll never need that feature, but it is easier to actuate a chronograph with your thumb. Central register chronograph, 60 minutes, other registers removed. Everything that's not chrono time or time of day has been minimized with a red print. It features both the copper sulfate capsule to withdraw moisture from the interior of the case, and it features their exceptional lubricant so you can operate it in scalding or freezing temperatures. It's a wonderful composite of Zinn's proprietary technologies, almost all of them in a single watch, and it's actually 200 meters water resistant too, so you can swim with the darn thing. 43 millimeters and tank tough. This is what took the place of all of my JLCs except for the vintage Snowdrop, and I haven't looked back one day since I made that choice. I love this watch. German cars and German watches, no disappointments. Just stay up on your maintenance.
Awesome. So here we have a quick question which we'll end on. Guys, is it me or did the time-only Pateks bring less than expected sums at the Geneva auctions? Which pieces were you talking? Because I think that, the time-only Pateks actually did quite well. I mean, I don't know if anybody saw, but the all platinum 5711 1P brought $400,000.
I was particularly impressed by the 5711 Tiffany dial because we have one. I was shocked when that thing went for 125,000 Swiss francs. Now that's not time only and it's a Nautilus, but still, you're talking about a modern watch with a print on the dial that said you bought it at a store in New York, and that's basically all it's got going over a $50,000 Nautilus.
Well, no, I mean, I think that what it does, though, is it does, if you look at the production numbers of the watch and you look at, okay, so this is a difficult piece to get, it's in high demand, it just further segments down the production into a finite number. So you have to assume that their allocation really isn't that, they're obviously a larger AD, but their allocation is still a finite number. So if they're one of a few stores in the world that even has access to doing this, it's almost a pseudo limited edition within the overall number.
I see what you're saying, but you're paying 75,000 Swiss francs
yeah, it's
for
a little
a Tiffany
bit
stamp.
it's a little,
I mean, it doesn't change the watch so fundamentally. Whereas I will say the older 5711s with the metallic overcoil hairspring and the screw fixed links, those are materially different. You throw a Tiffany stamp on that, now you've got a very different watch all around. But the Tiffany stamp by itself, that stuff doesn't... I'm unaffected by it. Someone's going to love that watch and enjoy it because it's a modern watch. You can get it wet. It's not like wearing a vintage watch. I still think it's crazy money. The $24.99 did well. I think the headline watches have done well at auctions recently, but there's been some underlying weakness. The undercard watches, I will agree with this. We've seen this in the last couple of Geneva and Hong Kong watches. Some pieces have gone for soft pricing or gone unsold. I don't want to say that's the shadow of the future, but I do think right now it's worth following some of those undercard watches and seeing how things go as we get deeper into auction season.
But I thought the prices for the most part were fair. Prices on 5070s, 5970s. I mean, they brought fair market value for the watch. And in this day and age, you know what? Information is easily accessible. Consumers are able to go online. They're able to see what watches are trading for, what they're offered for sale at. And I think that educated buyers out there understand that on a watch like those that are available to purchase at market prices aren't necessarily going to go for that much over, the market price unless there's a reason. And I thought that they brought, exactly that. But again, I think that is all that we have for this evening.
Yeah, definitely, guys. Thanks for participating in the chat.
Thank you guys.
180 concurrent viewers is close to a record for this show, and we owe it all to you. That's the reason we're here. It's the reason the shop's downstairs. It's the reason why I've got this job talking about watches on YouTube. Thanks for joining in, and friends from around the world, if you got up early, if you stayed up late, we thank you doubly. Until then, I'm Tim.
I'm Brian, and thank you guys for logging on.